A supersonic fighter jet, So-27, cut through the crowd with its wing at a crazy speed and then exploded. The families who had come to watch the pilot's performance became victims of the deadliest plane crash in the history of airshows. In this video, I'll tell you about 5 horrible tragedies that airshows turned into. So, viewer discretion is advised. On September 16, 2011, a singular air event was happening at Reno Airport, a high-speed race. Airplane races are regarded as the world's fastest kind of motorsport. Every year, the fastest pilots in the world conquer the Reno fixed course while doing several maneuvers, often only a few meters above the ground and at a speed of over 805 kilometers per hour. On that day, a P-51 Mustang World War II fighter jet named Galloping Ghost was competing on the route. It had been modified for racing and was being piloted by a Hollywood stunt pilot, Jimmy Leeward. He had a flying permit for various aircraft types, including experimental ones. The 74-year-old man's overall flying experience was over 13,000 hours. So while piloting the Galloping Ghost, Leeward was one of the 3 leading pilots. Yet after taking a turn by the spectator stands, Jimmy's plane abruptly pitched up. The Galloping Ghost gained altitude and disappeared behind the clouds for a second. Then it rolled inverted and started nosediving. At that moment, the fighter jet's speed was approximately 640 kilometers per hour, so the viewers didn't even have the time to understand what had happened. The plane hit the crowded spectator stands. The impact turned out to be so powerful that everything within the radius of a few dozen meters was blown into pieces, including the jet and the viewers. The next moment, screams of terror filled the space. The crash survivors rushed to escape, while literally a few meters above them in the spectator stands, the other viewers were still filming the disaster the air race had turned into. The only upside, however inconspicuous, was that the fuel from the jet dissipated into the air before it caught fire. This prevented an explosion and additional human casualties. Yet there were still too many. 7 people died at the crash site, including Jimmy Leeward, the pilot. 4 more people passed away in the hospital. But what had caused the horrible catastrophe that claimed the lives of 11 people? The Galloping Ghost had been renovated and modified for air racing, so it was almost as new. However, some of these modifications weakened the jet's structure, and some of its bolts and nuts hadn't been replaced in 25 years. So, during the fateful flight, the Galloping Ghost's body started deforming, and during one of the turns, the jet gave in to the immense pressure, and the old fixtures broke down. It was the most horrible tragedy at Reno air races, but sadly, far from the deadliest in air show history. Another dark chapter in the history of global aviation appeared on July 3, 1973. On that day, in one of the most legendary air shows happening in the French area of Bourget, a fierce competition was going on between the Anglo-French Concorde and the Soviet Tu-144, the world's first supersonic passenger aircraft. Something went wrong during the Soviet plane's presentation. At an altitude of less than 600 meters, the Tu-144 pitched over and went into a steep dive, the engines still at maximum capacity. Trying to pull out of the dive, the jet fell apart mid-air, ruining 15 houses in the neighboring town. In the aftermath, the crash killed all 6 crew members and 8 more people on the ground, making the total number of the dead 14. A large-scale investigation started, yet the real cause of the catastrophe was never found. However, according to one of Russia's popular theories, the Tu-144 pilot was trying to avoid crashing into a fighter jet that was secretly spying on the Soviet plane. The French side admitted they'd scrambled a reconnaissance plane the Soviets didn't know about. However, an investigation into the debris of the Soviet plane revealed that its primary flight recorder hadn't been turned on before the flight, and the rest had been destroyed. So, it's impossible to find out what had happened aboard the Tu-144 before the crash. Yet it's known that Moscow took all repayments and compensations upon itself, and the Bourget tragedy case got classified. Eventually, the production and maintenance of both experimental aircraft were terminated, yet no answers were ever found to the questions. In actuality, though, the Reno Air Show took 24 lives through its history. Despite this, it still can't be called the world's deadliest air show or lives through its history. November 6, 1952. The first post-war air race happened in the English town of Farnborough. The show attracted approximately 120,000 spectators who wanted to see a British jet plane prototype piloted by an aviation legend, John Derry. He was the first Brit to overcome the sound barrier on a jet plane. During the air race, the ace pilot decided to entertain the viewers by directing the shockwave from his jet toward the spectator stands. He raised the jet to a crazy altitude of 12,200 meters and then directed it downward at a speed of 800 kilometers per hour. At first, the spectators only saw a small silver dot, but very soon, it turned into a fighter jet racing over their heads at no higher than 15 meters. Only after the aircraft vanished behind the spectators' backs did the roar of the jet engines and the powerful wave of air reach them. They were in awe. Meanwhile, Derry took an abrupt turn to fly over the crowd again, but this time, something went wrong. During a left bank at approximately 830 kilometers per hour, the pilot pulled up into a climb. But in less than a second, the outer sections of the aircraft's wing, both engines, and the cockpit got separated from the airframe. With both crew members still inside, the cockpit fell right in front of the crowd. Like two rockets, the still red-hot engines hit the so-called observation hill with hundreds of viewers. A silent shock permeated the air, and only a few shrill screams sounded when the catastrophe happened. Having survived the shock, the witnesses saw the bodies of two dead pilots who had been flung out of the cockpit onto the spectators' fence. At the spot of the engine's landing, a crater appeared, strewn with the aircraft debris and the dead bodies around it. Among the victims, there was a young couple who died in each other's arms. Rescuers and the Red Cross employees who arrived at the scene were shocked. 63 people sustained wounds, scalds, and bone fractures that were worse than on the battlefield. 31 people died. Some of them were children who had come to their first and last air show ever. Later, it was revealed that the crash happened because of a mistake in the wing's design. As it turned out, they had only 64% of the intended strength, so the jet simply couldn't withstand the strain put on by the last maneuver. This tragedy pushed the organizers to introduce more stringent safety measures and limitations for air shows. Still, this failed to prevent an even larger scale catastrophe. On August 29, 1988, an air show named Flugtag was taking place at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. It gathered an almost 300,000 people crowd that wanted to see first-class aerobatic maneuvers. The last show of the day was the performance of the Italian Air Force display team. 10 jets were supposed to perform the pierced heart formation. The plane split into two groups. 5 flew to the left and 4 flew to the right, drawing two halves of a heart in the sky. The 10th jet, with the call sign Pony 10, was supposed to pierce through the formation with an arrow. When the 9 other planes were already finishing the heart shape, Pony 10 pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Ivo Nutarelli, directed his fighter jet at the thousands of viewers to draw an arrow. Yet when he approached the crossing with the 2 other plane groups, a disaster ensued. Nutarelli's jet crashed into the front plane of the left group, completely ruining its tail. The damaged Pony 1 got out of its pilot's control and slammed into the neighboring Pony 2. Both planes failed to stay in the air. Lieutenant Mario Naldini, who was in charge of Pony 1, managed to eject, but his parachute didn't have enough time to open. The man died along with the pilot of a medical helicopter that was hit by the fighter jet. Pony 2 exploded mid-air, taking the life of its pilot, Giorgio Alessio. However, the most horrifying thing was still ahead. The inflamed Pony 10 fell right in front of the spectator stands and then exploded into a giant ball of fire. The 3rd Italian pilot also died on the spot. Tons of burning red-hot iron hit the crowd exactly where most viewers had been. The entire catastrophe, from the first 2 planes' collision to the crash of Pony 10, happened in under 7 seconds and at an altitude of less than 45 meters above the ground, so the viewers had simply no chance of survival. At first, silence fell among the terrified crowd, and then everyone started screaming. There were injured people everywhere. Their clothes were on fire as they were running. Some were trying to climb out of the aircraft debris or free themselves from the molten barbed wire that got flung at the viewers from the nearby fence. Everything with wheels was immediately dispatched to the scene to transport the injured to hospitals. There turned out to be so many victims that the remaining spectators who were trying to leave the airbase got stuck in a several-hour traffic jam. In the aftermath, 346 people got injured at the Ramstein Airshow. and 70 people died. For a long time, this was the deadliest airshow catastrophe in history. But why did it happen? Everything points to the fact that Lieutenant Colonel Ivo Nudarelli went too fast and too low while approaching the point of crossing the other two aircraft groups. However, we also know that a second before the disaster, Pony 10's landing gear dropped. According to one theory, the pilot did this to try and slow down the plane, avoiding the catastrophe. Another version states that some sudden technical issue arose, which caused the crash itself. Still, no irrefutable proof of either theory has been found. For a long time, the Ramstein tragedy remained the deadliest in the history of air shows. Then came summer 2002. On July 27th, a large-scale air show dedicated to the 60th anniversary of an Air Corps of the Ukrainian Air Force was going to be held at Sknyliv airfield. Thousands of people from the neighboring towns and even the country's other regions flocked to the event. In the end, around 10,000 people arrived to watch advanced aeronautics formations. Many brought their entire families, and parents took days off work to take their kids to see the little planes. According to the plan, a MiG-29 fighter jet was supposed to do a demonstration flight, but failed to arrive on time due to poor weather conditions. So instead of it, another plane, a Su-27, was scrambled instead of it. This was no problem for the experienced pilots in the Ukrainian Falcons aerobatic team. The big show started, and the crowd was watching the fighter jets fly. Thousands of people huddled tightly in the airfield area. When one of the jets started doing a rolling maneuver, it became clear that something was wrong. At 12:52 p.m., the fighter jet hurled over the spectators' heads, brushed its wing against the ground, hit two nearby planes, and then crashed into the crowd, cutting everything in its way with its wing. After this catastrophic damage, the fighter jet exploded. Black smoke shrouded the sky, and the people around started panicking. But it was absolute hell for those who were at the epicenter of the crash. 3-year-old Ostap suddenly felt the heat from the fire and pressure from above, although just a second before, he was in his mom's arms. Back then, the boy didn't realize yet that he survived because his mother had covered his body with hers. However, she couldn't protect Ostap's 10-year-old brother, whom a shockwave had tossed a few meters away from his family. The older boy also survived due to a lucky coincidence, yet the boy's mother died. Footage of injured Ostap went viral and shocked the world. The boy himself didn't even realize what had happened to him. It took long-term psychological assistance, and only when he grew older did the boy become conscious of the horror he survived as a little child. There were too many tragic stories like this one on that hellish day, because over 250 people were injured and 77 victims died in the Sknyliv airshow tragedy. 28 of them were children. Describing the scene of the event, the rescuers used the spine-chilling word, biomass, since the dead spectators' bodies were impossible to identify. A day of mourning was announced in the country. After the families of the dead overcame the initial shock of loss, they started demanding answers and justice. As it turned out, both pilots of the crashed jet fighter successfully ejected. Criminal charges were pressed against 10 people involved in the organization and holding of the airshow. In the end, primary pilot Volodymyr Toponar was sentenced to 14 years behind bars, and his partner, Yuri Yurgorov, was sentenced to 8 years. 2 more military officers were in prison, and another one received a suspended sentence. However, the court acquitted the 4 generals involved in the case, as well as the high command of the Ukrainian Air Force. Although the pilots weren't allowed to undergo additional training in complex maneuvers and were told to perform dangerous formations right above the spectators' heads. And even though Volodymyr Toponar, a pilot with 27 years of experience, stated that during the deadly maneuver, he felt the power of both engines drop due to a reason unknown to him. Yet the court's decision was unshakable. After the Sknyliv tragedy, air shows were banned in Ukraine, and the catastrophe remains the deadliest in history. Moreover, starting from 1904, not a single year's gone by without at least one airshow tragedy. I know you don't like me moralizing, but I doubt that carefulness and responsibility will hurt you, as well as a subscription to my channel and a comment in which you tell me what you'd like to see in the coming videos.